Since its founding in 1897, with a mission to promote French culture in a rebuilt and growing city, the Alliance Française of Chicago is proud to have been a significant part of Chicago's cultural life. William Rainey Harper, president of the University of Chicago and one of the Alliance's founding trustees, traveled to New York in 1902 to represent the Chicago Committee, as it was then called, as a charter member of the Federation of Alliance Française in the United States and Canada.
Or, l'Allemagne brusquait la situation, déclarait le 1er août la guerre à la Russie et rendait l'appel aux armes inévitable. Et si l'Allemagne diplomatiquement brisait la paix dans son germe, c'est parce que depuis plus de 40 ans, elle poursuivait inlassablement son but. C'était l'écrasement de la France pour arriver à l'asservissement du monde. Toutes les révélations sont apportées à ce tribunal de l'histoire où il n'y a pas de place pour la corruption. Et puisque malgré leur attachement à la paix, la France et ses alliés ont dû survivre la guerre, ils la feront jusqu'au bout.
By the time that the European War broke out in August 1914, the Chicago Alliance was already making significant cultural contributions in the city. And even though the United States did not enter the war as a combatant until April 1917, the members of the Chicago Alliance were actively supporting the French cause. It is appropriate for today's Alliance Française of Chicago to commemorate the events of that era by reflecting on the significance of that first of modern wars, and to reaffirm our solidarity, our alliance, with France and the French people. Two women who have each led the Alliance as president in their own time, 80 years apart, have provided a written record of their personal experiences with that great war that allow us, the Alliance public, to share a bit of their insight. This exhibition is dedicated to them with gratitude for what they have given us. Before there was an Armistice Day or reconstruction of a devastated France, there were soldiers like 19-year-old André Pezon, who interrupted his education and his young life to volunteer to serve France.
Liverpool, 4 août 1914. Ma chère Geneviève, enfin j'ai pris la résolution de rentrer. Crois-tu que ce n'est pas terrible d'être dans un pays étranger, de savoir que sa patrie est en danger et de n'avoir pas de nouvelles de rien? Crois-tu que quand on a 20 ans et qu'on entend les canons gronder, on peut rester inactif? Je ne puis rester dans cette incertitude et je pars ce soir. Encore une fois, bon baiser à tous et pour toi les meilleurs. André.
We know this young man and a small bit of his eye-level view of that war through the efforts of his daughter, Solange Brown. A longtime active member of the board of directors of the Alliance, she served as president of the board from 2002 until 2004.
I was surprised how enthusiastic he was to go. In his first letter to his cousin, he says, well, there is a war and I want to make sure I'm not going to miss it. And basically he leaves the first day he can leave from England to go to France. And actually, one day he said to me that on the boat there was also a German who was rushing to go back to Germany. And how eager he was to go, how short he thought it was going to be. He just didn't want to miss it. And he volunteered. He could have, I guess I learned that you didn't have to go to war until you were 20 and he was 19.
Several years ago, Solange found letters written throughout the war by her father to his cousin, Geneviève Bouvier, whom he would marry after the war. With the support and aid of her husband Bill, she arranged these letters, had them carefully transcribed, and published as a memoir for her family.
The letters were found by accident, in a way, in a piece of furniture that was left in our house by my sister, who did not want it, and it stayed there. And I never really opened it because it was just there. And then one day I thought, well, I should really look in there and clean it up. And I found on the bottom shelf 4 envelopes, rather fat, large envelopes. And I thought, oh, what is it? And they were, each envelope had the date of a year, 1914, 1915, etc., until 1919. And those, when I looked inside, they were my father's letters to my mother during the war, and they were in they were more or less in the right order when they had been sent. Most of them were just loose without envelopes. Some had envelopes, and some were postcards. And I thought, well, maybe it's interesting, and it was. And I thought, well, maybe I should do something for my children and my grandchildren so they will know what their grandfather did. It was more it is a family project, and that's how I started. And I had somebody who helped me to put them in order because I was not very patient at the end to put it all together.
Through these letters, we have the privilege of understanding a little better how the war looked from the vantage point of this one French soldier.
29 janvier 1916. Ma chère Geneviève, où as-tu pu voir que tes lettres m'importunaient? Comme tu me connais mal, ma chère Geneviève, et aussi comme tu te rends mal compte de ce qu'est pour nous une lettre de ceux que nous aimons. Ignorerais-tu par hasard que l'heure attendue toute la journée est l'heure du courrier? Si tu voyais au moment où le vague maître arrive avec son paquet de lettres, avec quel plaisir on entend appeler son nom. Alors on s'en va avec sa lettre, et loin de tous on s'absorbe dans la lecture de ses lettres. Mais quelle triste mine on fait également quand on n'a rien pour soi. André.
Historians have applied the term total war to this conflict, the first of modern wars taking a toll not only on the soldiers in the trenches, but on the entire society.
My father was in England to learn a job about the import of cotton coming from this country, and that was the end of his education. That was the end of any education for that generation. And what really surprises me is then it's the end also of the end of education for the next generation. For instance, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law was in law school. Well, that was the end of law school. After World War II, there was no GI Bill. So basically there are two generations, one after the other in France, who did not have a higher education, or it was cut. And I think also on the civilian side, I can see that it affected, because I found now my mother's journal, it affected her too, and same thing, it affected my sisters during World War II. So there were two generations, both sides, men and women, who were affected by the war badly.
The war left France devastated. American efforts were underway to aid France and the French with reconstruction. Olive Woodward Hulbert, president of the Alliance Française of Chicago from 1919 until 1923, was determined to help. About 3 years ago, one of her grandsons, George W. Renwick, gave us the scrapbooks that his grandmother had meticulously kept that chronicle her time with the Alliance.
At the Alliance during the First World War and afterwards, one of the things she was really concerned about was the devastation of so many towns and villages in France. Having lived there herself, she'd been to many of these places, and just seeing the pictures and imagining the damage that had been done. So she determined to help particular villages. She chose one village, Pagny-sur-Moselle, and went to great efforts to raise enough money through the Alliance and the network that she had built while with the Alliance, but through other organizations in the United States, raise enough money to rebuild this village. And not only the money, but all of the plans that it took here and in France. She orchestrated this one. One of the most moving memories my mother, her sisters, have of these travels was when they, with their mother, my grandmother, went to this village, now completely restored. The welcome that was given my grandmother and all four daughters by the people whose village now was beautifully restored, was one of the most moving experiences any of them had ever had, as you can imagine.
Mrs. Hulbert's scrapbooks tell a story of tireless efforts by the members of the Alliance Française during and after the First World War. There was relief work in cooperation with the Red Cross.
My grandmother was not only committed to meeting very directly, significantly, the needs of people around her in this country, but of course in France. And she was not only good at identifying individuals who could contribute to these really worthwhile projects she would come up with, she would recognize which other organizations, local, national organizations, even international organizations, would be able to contribute to these really worthwhile efforts that she was launching. And the Red Cross was one of them that not only had the resources, had some substantial financial support, but was the leaders of the Red Cross at that point understood fully what my grandmother was trying to do.
We also discovered that Mrs. Hulbert used her considerable skills as a hostess to connect French dignitaries with prominent Chicagoans.
Je viens vous demander ce que vous voulez faire pour aider la France, pour protéger la démocratie. À deux reprises différentes sur ce sol de l'Amérique, nous avons livré ensemble de magnifiques batailles qui ont abouti au plus brillant succès. Et voilà que cette visite, qui est la gloire de nos deux peuples, l'occasion s'est présentée pour vous de nous la rendre, et vous l'avez fait avec une générosité vraiment américaine. Le général Pershing, sur la tombe de Lafayette, a dit à son arrivée le mot qu'il fallait dire. Lafayette, nous voilà. Pas un cœur français qui n'est tressailli à cette parole désormais historique.
My grandmother was a very gracious, generous hostess in her family, but also in her responsibilities with the Alliance. She hosted the dignitaries from France who came to Chicago, and this was Madame Curie, Sarah Bernhardt, Maréchal Foch, Jove, Clemenceau. She would organize receptions for these people, invite those people in Chicago, in fact from this whole region, who would be most interested in meeting them, people whom the visitors, the dignitaries themselves, most like to meet. And she would orchestrate the whole event and facilitate the introductions and give some background on each person to the other. She did this very naturally and warmly and with incredible knowledge about each of the people, the Americans, the French people, people from quite a few different countries.
We invite you to spend time with each of the pieces in this exhibit, study them, contemplate, and imagine what else is going on in the lives of these people and those around them. Revel with us in the proud tradition of the Alliance Française of Chicago, which has benefited from great leadership by people like Olive Hulbert and Solange Brown, two women whose personal lives embody our ideals of intercultural communication and understanding.